But right now, let's talk to Phillip Ingram, former senior military intelligence officer. The Prime Minister has insisted that Britain is about to increase its ambitions on defence spending, allocating an extra £5 billion for the Ministry of Defence. He set out an ambition for it to reach 2.5% of GDP, but refused to set a date on exactly how that is going to happen. He's out in San Diego today doing a deal with the Australian leader Anthony Albanese, and President Joe Biden, of course, is there as well. We'll find out precisely what that actually means for us and what it means for the military in this country. Phillip, a very good morning to you. Welcome.
Good morning, Mike.
Thanks very much for joining us. I mean, we've heard, I suppose, quite a lot over the recent years because of, not just because of the war in Ukraine, but generally speaking, that the West as a whole has kind of rode back a bit on its military spending. That looks like it's going to be reversed.
Well, it's certainly changing because the threat landscape's changing. The West has had a significant military spend, outspending Russia, outspending China. America is the biggest military spender on the globe.
And so this deal that's being done out in San Diego over a submarine supply to Australia, I think, is a new one as well, isn't it?
It is. The Australians were going to buy some submarines from the French. They were going to buy some diesel-electric submarines.
Right.
But they changed their mind after a little bit of British persuasion to go for nuclear-powered submarines because that gives them a much greater reach. And given the pivot of security threats to Southeast Asia and the rise of China, it makes sense that Australia gets a capability that can properly counter the threats that are coming in. And it was a debate between whether it was going to be a UK submarine or a US submarine, and I think they're going for the US one, but it's interesting, the UK is still staying as part of the deal.
Yeah, I mean, the UK still has one of the highest sort of profiles, if you like, of defence spending in the world, doesn't it? I mean, it's still one of the top spending countries. But Edward Lucas, writing the Times today, says Britain cannot really sustain a global military role. Is he right about that?
No, he's not. Britain is today sustaining a global military role. Probably not at the levels that we would like to do. You look at the Navy. The Navy is across the globe at the moment and providing a presence and active operations. The Army is primarily focused on Europe, but again is globally deployed, as is the Air Force. So it's whether we can meet the emerging global threats. That's the more accurate question.
Yes, and I mean, I suppose the difficulty for an awful lot of those in the armed forces in this country is that there's just not very many of them. I mean, the number of personnel has been denuded by about 30 or 40,000, isn't it?
Yeah, the numbers are going down, and I think I'd argue the mismanagement within the Ministry of Defence has led to a number of cases where a large proportion of taxpayers' money has been completely and utterly wasted. The French have got more equipment for less money. They've got more people for less money. That suggests that there's something going wrong inside our own Ministry of Defence. Right. And I know there's capabilities that exist that in defence that just aren't needed on the modern battlefield.
No, quite. And what do you think those deficiencies are, though, inside the management of the Ministry of Defence? What are they?
Well, I think part of the problem is that the senior management within the Ministry of Defence is not focusing on the future and planning for the future. They're trying to play political games today and tomorrow and looking after themselves. And therefore, they're misbriefing ministers in what is going on. The debacle over the Army's Ajax programme that has supposedly been fixed with some new cushions and air defenders, that's wasted billions. Right. It's potentially wasted more money than that $5 billion that the Prime Minister has just announced. And there's countless programmes after programmes after programmes. The HMS Prince of Wales, the aircraft carrier that has gone quiet because it had problems with its propeller shaft. That is a big issue. That is going to take a lot of defence money to try and fix. The Ministry of Defence accepted it into service knowing there was a fault on it. It's just wrong. Yeah.
I mean, that's hard to believe, isn't it? The amount of money that's spent on these individual sort of pieces of hardware, and they get something so basic so wrong. You just kind of go, well, how is that possible? You literally had one job.
Yeah, and again, a lot of the money spent on what I call big green or big grey shiny things that look really good, and you can stick a politician on the top of them and say this is fantastic. But what isn't spent is all the stuff the money that's needed and all the stuff behind that to make sure it works. You know, me from an intelligence background, I was calling out for years for a similar capability to we had in the 1980s in Northern Ireland, and I never got it. People were dying because of that, but it's not a big green or grey shiny thing, so people wouldn't spend the money on it.
No, right. And because of the amount of aid and sort of hardware, if you like, that we are giving to Ukraine, how much longer will that go on, do you think, and how much longer can it go on? Is it sort of until the end? Because the end could be a very long way away.
Yeah, I think support to Ukraine can go on to the end, and it can increase. You know, we've got more that we can give. What it's doing is it's highlighting what's called the defence industrial base and its importance in supporting conflicts at this sort of level. And it's a very important lesson to learn at the moment. And I think, you know, the UK's defence industrial base is beginning to ramp up with other defence industrial bases in other countries, including America, which is the most important one. And we will support Ukraine right to the very end.
Yeah, and when do you think that end might come, though? Because, I mean, we've seen the Russians sort of up the ante really recently, haven't we? We've seen the long-expected sort of new offensive starting. It doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon.
Well, we have. I was expecting the Russians to do slightly more than they've done. And, you know, it's all focused on Bakhmut at the moment. And they've been trying to capture Bakhmut for over 8 months now and failing miserably. And therefore, there's not much can happen now that the ground is thawing out and is very, very soft indeed. That plays to the Ukrainians because the Ukrainians are preparing to bring in Western tanks, Western equipment, all the rest of it. As soon as they get that in, I think the Ukrainians are going to start taking big chunks of territory back again. They have to do it in bite-sized chunks, because otherwise they'll overface themselves. I think they might, if they're lucky, get the main part of Ukraine back this year. It could well go into next year, but that won't have touched Crimea. Crimea's next year's problem at the earliest.
Well, that's it. So, I mean, you're saying at least 2024, possibly, and maybe the end of 2024 before we know anything.
Well, exactly, yes. And it could go on even longer.
Unbelievable. Very difficult story to cover, isn't it? Philip, thanks very much indeed. Phillip Ingram there, former senior military intelligence officer, talking to us about the military spend, which is going up in this country, but also with the rather, I would say, gloomy outlook for the Ukraine war, which he says will definitely go until probably the end of 2024.